I want you to make sure you're securely seated, because this is going to be so sexy that some of you may actually faint. Okay, so make sure that you're not going to have your head hit the floor, because this is my first computer. It's a Mac Plus. Look at what that baby had under the hood. Well, yeah, I know. It's pretty primitive. Now, I've got an older iMac today. It needs to be updated, but look at the difference between 1989 and 2012 when I bought that iMac. It's incredible. So it's kind of like going from this to this in just a generation. We're going to see that kind of change in chapter 22. Because the chapter that we're going to start focuses on the Industrial Revolution. But I need to impress something on you. Hello, sheep. We could not have had an Industrial Revolution unless we had first had a revolution in agriculture. And why that is, it will take us a little while to get there, and I hope it'll be entertaining. But the connection between a revolution in agriculture and a revolution in industry is remarkably simple. Let's start by defining terms. And as you can tell, the Industrial Revolution had a wee bit of a downside. Are you ready? This is so simple. The Industrial Revolution, which, give or take a few minutes, begins roughly in 1750 in England, is very simply, we go from this to this. In other words, the very simple definition is, the definition of the Industrial Revolution, you're going to love this because it's so simple. Very, very simply, it's the shift from manpower to machine power. And that shift was made possible by the steam engine, which was perfected, not invented, but perfected by a Scotsman, James Watt. Boy, look at that diagram. It's kind of like, you ever kind of get hypnotized watching your clothes go round and round in the dryer? This diagram has the same effect on me. I could just watch it for hours. First, excuse me, before we get to the Industrial Revolution, what made it possible was a revolution in agriculture. Sorry. Ta-da! Thank you, Mrs. Sims King from the UK, proudly ripped off by me. Now, traditionally, going back to the Middle Ages, the old system of farming is like nothing you and I are used to. It was called the open field system. Open because there were no fences or hedges around the field, so that each family in a village could walk into the field. They didn't farm the whole field, like Mr. Doey's fields are enclosed and they are farmed by Mr. Doey and his workers, and they belong to Mr. Doey. No. In an open field system, each family had not a field, but strips within a field that they farmed. Hey, Harry, there's your strips over there, mate. George, no, one more to the left. There you go, mate. See, they would divide up it was called actually a field jury, who would divide up the strips among the families in a village. And after they brought the harvest in, that field would be left alone, like this little fella here who's so cute. It would be left fallow to rest for a season. Then they would move to a new field, split up the strips, dictated by the field jury once again. Now, the problem with this open field system, are the problems with the open field system. It is exceedingly inefficient. Here are some of them. Thank you, Mrs. Sims King. And they include, yes, if your neighbor is LeBron James and he is walking to his strips, he has to cross over your strips. Do you see the point? Another problem, there are also, like, for example, mule deer around here. To mule deer from San Luis Obispo County, Garbanzo beans are like caviar. I mean, they love garbanzo beans, which are called chickpeas somewhere else in the U.S. where people are weird. So that means if the fields are open, critters are going to get in your garbanzo beans. That's a problem. Also, this business about letting the field rest, just leaving it alone, the problem is with not planting that field, by letting it rest, you're also leaving it vulnerable to wind and soil and rain, all the kinds of erosion you can think of. Whoosh, there goes the topsoil. And finally, suppose you want to try to do something new and innovative. Hey, mates, let's grow garbanzo beans. No, I want to grow kale. See, you cannot get an entire village to agree on trying something new because you're always going to have some idiot who wants to grow kale, which I despise. See, that guy. I don't want to. Shut up, mate. So, this is an inefficient system. And it's inefficient at a time when, thanks in part to cottage industry, little towns are starting to become bigger, and bigger towns are starting to become cities, and you have all these people who need to be fed like these baby birds. So, if you're smart enough and can figure out how to grow more food, there is money to be made. And that's where the revolution happens. It happens not because of villagers who farm in a medieval way. It happens because of agricultural experts like this fellow. Because there's money to be made, bigger landowners with some education and some know-how, primarily in Holland and England, start to fool around with new ways of farming. We spare no expense when it comes to special effects. Great changes are coming. And here they come. I'm so excited. Are you ready? I thought it was exciting. Okay, enough of what Mr. Gregory thinks is exciting. What were the changes that would combine to make what we call an agricultural revolution? What a good question. I'm glad you asked it. Now, big change number one. Do you remember this from Star Wars, where they get squished almost in the garbage compactor? That illustrates a phenomenon that took place over several centuries in England called Enclosure. This is how Enclosure works. Oh, I guess I should explain it. Notice something about these fields? They aren't open fields, are they? For an A or an F, how did I describe an open field? A field without a hedge or fence around it. These have stone fences. That's significant. What would happen is the guy whose picture I showed you a minute ago was wearing a badge that said farm expert. These guys who had some education and, let's be honest with each other, some money, began buying out the peasant strips. Hello, I'd like to buy your strips. And how much do you want for them then? I've got some magic beans. Sold. So, okay, they would buy out a village's strips, and then they would consolidate them and build a fence around them. This is what these Mr. Farm Expert guys did. Then, here we come, we call it enclosure because they would build a fence or plant a hedge to keep the beasties out, keep the deer away from the garbanzo beans. Okay, are you with me so far? We've got the fields enclosed. The fields are being managed, planted, cultivated by one person, not by a whole village. It takes a village to screw up a field. Now, because it's one person, that person will start to plant crops using some of the new techniques. What are the new techniques? I hear a voice out there. Oh, what a good student. Sometimes, by the way, the fields were not planted, to be honest with you, because sheep, or as I like to call them, sheeps are very much in demand. And during the 1700s, when the pace of this phenomenon called enclosure begins to pick up, about 600,000 acres of British farmland were enclosed. And remember, in England, which is slightly bigger than our quad, that's a lot of land. Now, here's a problem. What if you're a peasant village and some of the villagers don't want to sell their strips? We don't want to sell our strips. Granny had them, you know. They've been here since, well, I don't know, I can't count that far back. Because there's always going to be a guy like that who doesn't want to sell his strips. Not a problem. Now, what if there was a guy who didn't want to sell his strips? I like my strips. They keep me company. Well, no problem, because you, as a relatively wealthy and well-educated landowner, you had connections. You went to see your local MP, member of parliament, and said, I need an act of parliament because this lout will not give up his strips. And you could get them evicted. Goodbye, peasants. And you should be asking yourself, would that offend John Locke? And John Locke be damned. It's the wealthy people who rule the world. Excuse me, in England in the 1700s. Oh, yeah, and the Koch brothers today. But anyway, if you knew somebody in Parliament, if you had connections, and usually those people in Parliament were, guess what, landowners too, all you needed was an act of Parliament. This was essentially an eviction notice. So these vapid, empty, stupid people here were the winners in the enclosure process. Yeah, and the Monty Python people were the losers. Now, enclosure is important, but it's not the only thing that would make an agricultural revolution possible. You got the land enclosed. It's being farmed by one person, right? Okay, so we can experiment with new methods. So where are the new methods going to come from? From nerds, right? And there are some important nerds in both agriculture and in industry that you'll meet this chapter. Guys like Steve Jobs, who were innovators. And some of the innovations may seem pretty primitive to you. Well, guess what? Here's Apple I. That was primitive too. And look what happened to this puppy. So if enclosure was the first big change number two were these innovators. And here's one of the most important ones. He was a farmer named Bakewell, should have been Barbecue-Well, who experimented with selective breeding. That is, you breed only your biggest, juiciest, meatiest males with the equivalent female, and what you come up with, see, there's a cow in love, is big darn cows. Look at that. That is incredible. It's doubling the size of the average English cow. By the way, the beasties who aren't the biggest, fittest, meatiest, and juiciest, we call those jerky. Other new ideas. Bakewell's was just one. There was crop rotation. There was something called the seed drill. There was, believe it or not, publicity was important. I cannot overemphasize the importance of poop. And another guy, you know, Bakewell, another guy who's important. And maybe I think the single most important man in the agricultural revolution was this guy, Charles Townsend, who got the nickname Turnip. I much prefer being called Capability. But he got that nickname because of his obsession with planting crops like turnips. And that obsession was incredibly smart. See, Townsend pioneered something called crop rotation. Instead of letting, that field lie fallow, where, rain and wind and stuff could carry the topsoil away, What Townsend did was, let's plant crops like turnips, clover, and beans in that field. We'll come back to it and farm it later. But what happens is, crops like clover, turnips, and beans, not only do they hold the soil in place, so they prevent soil erosion, okay? No soil erosion, no dust bowl. The second thing is these are nitrogen-bearing crops. So what they do is they reinvigorate, they re-nourish the soil, make it more productive. So you're killing several birds with one turnip. And one more guy. So important that a 60s rock band was named after him was Jethro Tull, who invented the seed drill, which I like to describe as kind of a Pez dispenser. Only instead of Pez's, did you ever see those kids who pick up trash with the pointy sticky things? Yeah, they've been bad. Well, that's kind of what a seed drill looked like. What you would do is you would stick this stick and then pull a trigger, and then like a Pez dispenser, the seed would be punched into the topsoil. So what, you say? Well, here's so what. The traditional way was just to cast the seed by hand onto the topsoil. And as Jesus said in the parables, some of that soil is eaten by birds, some of it is carried away by the wind or the rain, and some of it is appropriated by the Romans. I don't think Jesus said that. I made that up. But the point is, what this does is to exponentially increase crop yields. You're wasting less seed. You're giving seed a better chance to germinate. And that means more and better harvests. And I mentioned publicity. That's important too. Look at the size of that cow. And, oh my God, my cow ate my missus. You got cows like that because people read about Jethro Tull. They read about Turnip Townsend. They read about Bakewell. They got together at county fairs and they exchanged ideas. That's what county fairs are important for. They're not for going up to Paso Robles and seeing old country western acts that are so desperate they're on the free stage. You know what I mean? County fairs were for exchanging ideas and showing off the cow that ate your missus. And getting ribbons. Oh, if you're going to have big darned animals, remember what we saw, the typical size of a cow doubled thanks to Bakewell? You're going to have big darn thing else. And that's important. Big darn poop is significant. Yes, don't we know? Because what's happening is you're further enriching the topsoil of places like England, also in Holland, because of more and better fertilizer. Psst. You see what else is going on? More fertilizer, or to use the technical term, poop, means bigger crop yields, more vegetables and cereals. Also, the fact that we're breeding more animals, and bigger ones, brings the price of animal protein down. It's more available to the general population of Europe, except, of course, for the Irish. More and better food means healthier Europeans. Healthier Europeans means that those Europeans have a tendency to, wait for it, make little baby Europeans. And those little baby Europeans, because of better nourishment, stand a much better chance of living to adulthood, which is why we begin to see dead baby pictures. And as tasteless as the term dead baby pictures is, remember what it means from chapter 20. It means that now parents can finally afford to invest their love in their children. Children are valued and cherished. Now, as important as the English were to the agricultural revolution, to be honest with you, they would steal a lot of their ideas from the Dutch. Because if England is the size of our quad, Holland's about the size of the boys' restroom, which means that the Dutch have to maximize every square mile of land. In fact, they have to steal some of it. Because Holland is so low, below sea level, a lot of land has to be drained and reclaimed, reclamation, from swamps. In fact, the Dutch become experts at reclaiming land from the sea itself. And when the sea is drained, the seabed is very silty, very rich, superb for growing crops and for growing happy cows. Because if there's one thing the Dutch have, it's happy cows, which make happy cheese, which makes happy whipped cream on top of your Dutch pancakes. Now here's a diagram of what the Dutch are up to. When they drain, say, the seabed becomes a field, what they call a polder. And at the polder, there you got the sloot and the molen, which is the windmill which pumps the water, which goes over the gamal, through the canal, and everything is held back by a digik. There. My fluent Dutch has come through once again. And don't forget, the Dutch innovation leads to awesome pancakes. Meanwhile, back in England, not everybody was happy. Remember all those peasants who have been kicked off their land or bought off their land? You know, it's like visualize a herd of peasants with nothing to do, kind of milling around aimlessly. I know, it's just like freshmen. Terrifying. So what Britain has is a surplus of evicted farmers milling around, bumping into each other, and potentially causing problems. See? They're a grumpy-looking lot, aren't they? And meanwhile, the British are reproducing like that. So you got a lot of people. And let me show you what I mean by a lot of people. Between 1800 and 1900, thanks to this agricultural revolution that begins roughly 1750, Great Britain's population triples. That's a lot of limeys. Here it comes. This is the beauty part. Why am I talking about this in a chapter about the Industrial Revolution? Well, this agricultural revolution, this exponential increase in food production, which leads to a tripling of British population. Some of them farmers who no longer have farming to do because they've been evicted thanks to foreclosure and enclosure. The connection is tons of people, which provide plenty of cheap labor. You can pay those people in the factory you're going to start up, you can pay them below Walmart wages. You can even pay them less than Lucia Mar teachers because there's so many of them. And cheap labor, cheap and plentiful labor, is one of the most important ingredients to sparking the Industrial Revolution in England, which begins, again, roughly 1750 and really takes off about 1800. Now, again, see what I mean? There's such a population increase since there are now more workers than there are jobs because the factories are still growing, but the people aren't waiting for it. They're reproducing. You, Mr. Filthy Rich Capitalist, can pay the lowest wages you want. And if they don't like it, you fire them and hire somebody else. You'll learn in American history that we'll do the same thing during our Industrial Revolution. If your workers go out on strike and say most of them are Russians, you fire the Russians and you hire Hungarians. If the Hungarians don't like it, you fire the Hungarians, you hire Italians. Because everybody needs a job. And that's why everybody looks so poor. The good news, as the Industrial Revolution progresses, both in England and later, because our Industrial Revolution comes later, in the United States, gradually wages and working conditions are going to improve, partly because of labor unionization. But more on that later. Now, this will be worth 237,000 times 68. Yeah, they'll be worth that many points. Here we go.